What's the hardest thing you've had to tell someone? I had to tell my grandfather that he wasn't going to come home from the hospital. I had to tell my 20-year-old nephew that his grandma wasn't coming home from the hospital. I'll never forget the look on his face. He walked into the bathroom, shut the door, and cried his heart out. I have a new level of respect for how hard it must have been for my mom to tell me my best friend wasn't going to get better. Until I read this, I had never thought of this before. I was 11, and all I could think about was how earlier that weekend was the last time I would ever see him, and how ragged his breathing was. How hard it was for him to open his eyes. And how I felt at that moment. I can't imagine how hard it was for her to take the hard facts, which even she couldn't think of without breaking down, and destroy me with them. This is on the top 3 hardest things to say to someone you know and love. When I was 14, I had to call my mother and tell her my eldest brother committed suicide. My dad could not call her because they were divorced, and she had blocked him. 14? Wow. You were very strong to do that. Telling my parents I was a heroin addict. I was in an abusive relationship and hard into drugs and worried I would die. I needed help. My dad sat with me through the entire withdrawal, and I'll be 10 years clean this November. I tell him all the time that he saved my life. I had to, separately, tell my 2 young boys, my sister-in-law, and mother-in-law, that my wife, their mother-daughter, had died. It's been over 3 years, and thinking about it is still devastating. I had to tell my sister that our mother died. Worst phone call I've ever had to make by a long shot. I'm so sorry you lost your wife, 2 hearts. Telling my wife her dad was dead. Firefighter/EMT here. Had to tell a family on Christmas Eve one year that their baby was dead. Man, from talking to people that have been in the biz, this is the thing that seems to stick with EMS workers the most. I worked as an EMT doing med transport and now work in a hospital with decedent care reps, so has never had to worry about that, but from talking to a lot of IMS and paramedics, this seems to be a big PTSD originator. They say the screams and cries of family members haunt them forever. Super effed up and sad. I don't wish it on anyone. I also had the unfortunate privilege of being surrounded by fire, within inches of reaching a child making his last cries, and failing to reach him in time. That haunted me more than anything for years. PTSD and mental health issues in first responders are very real, and for every story you might hear from one of us, there are 10 we'd rather never speak of again. Calling my mom to tell her my father died of cancer. He had Alzheimer, and I was the one who was staying with him that night. He had to be watched 24/7, or he would escape the hospital. Had to tell my friend's ex-girlfriend why he had a closed casket funeral. He stepped in front of an 18-wheeler on the highway. Feel bad upvoting things like this. The Secretary of the Army regrets to inform you. To a Vietnam vet whose son had just died in Afghanistan. Then having to give the same speech to the kid's mother who was chain-smoking and bawling her eyes out because the dad called to tell her before I got there. I had to tell my wife her father just died in a car accident. Edit. Other than the Worcestershire response, which is hilarious, F this thread. Wholly depressing. Honestly, reading through these, I needed that Worcestershire response in my life. I had to tell a 4-year-old that I couldn't be his mom. Context: growing up, my parents fostered. Just before I moved out, we looked after 2 kids under 5. I was reading him his bedtime story, and out of nowhere he just said, "I don't have a mummy. Can you be my mum?" In this teary voice. Both siblings have a really happy home now, but I went to bed teary-eyed that night. A few years ago, I had to tell my 14-year-old daughter that her 16-year-old cousin had committed suicide. It was the most heartbreaking thing I've ever had to witness. Trying to explain to my mom who I was to her. That's always so hard. My dad was developing dementia. He kept thinking I was my mom, reminiscing about old times, funny stories. But he looked like he also knew it wasn't right. It's hard to accept and understand how someone knows you your whole life, then the brain just flips. It's unbearable. My heart goes to you, it's absolutely awful. I was on vacation when my dad died while on a business trip. He had a heart attack walking back to the hotel after dinner. I woke up to 30 voicemails and as many texts, all please call me, it's about your dad, around 3 a.m. I called his siblings and told them, which was miserable. But I had to tell my mom, who was also on vacation. We all lived in the same city, they had divorced, and we were all in different states at the time, just a giant cluster F of timing, not that there's a good time for someone you love to die randomly. She's nearly deaf and can't hear without aids, so calling wouldn't have woken her up. She was in a different time zone, so I texted her at what would have been 4 a.m. to please call me ASAP. By the time she called, I was 2 hours into a 9-hour drive heading back home. With the road noise and her hearing issues, I was basically yelling through tears, "Dad is dead. He had a heart attack and died." Because she couldn't understand me the first 3 times. 3 years later, even thinking about this call makes me tear up. It was so frustrating. I watched my grandmother take her last breath. Calling my dad to tell him his mom had died. My breast cancer has spread to my bones. It's stage 4. At this stage, the doctors focus on management rather than cure. The average time between diagnosis and death is about 5 years. My friends just stopped treating their 5-year-old son. Time to focus on love. Best of luck to you. I'm sorry. When I was 17 years old, my parents were out of state. That morning, my sister's friend came to the front door. Basically, my sister had overdosed, which I didn't know at the time, and was in the backseat of her friend's car, barely breathing and unconscious. Her friend didn't know what to do, so she had been driving around for a while. We got her to the ER, and she wasn't breathing. Then, I had to make the most god-awful phone call of my life. My mom answers. I was trying to speak but nothing came out. I started crying and could only mutter a weird noise. My mom starts crying and gives the phone to my dad. Then I'm able to tell him that we were at the hospital and I don't know what is wrong with her. So, they are losing their minds, of course, trying to pack everything up to hit the road for the 4 to 5 hour drive. Thankfully though, my grandpa lived on the same road as us, so he was close and able to come hang out at the hospital with me since I was stuck there and didn't know what to do. Sister ended up being fine and was free to go after a couple of days. Crazy thing though, I was supposed to be at work when her friend came by, but I had slept through my alarm. Don't know how things would have turned out had I been at work. I hope she dropped that friend. I mean, seriously, your sister is dying, and she's driving around cause she doesn't know what to do? She is certainly not a good person. I had to tell everyone at work a colleague of ours had taken his own life that morning. Working for the fire department, I had to tell many family members that their loved one did not survive their medical emergency. Backstory: we used to ship most patients to the hospital, even if we knew they weren't going to make it. That meant that the patient left in the ambulance and the family followed, and all the bad news was delivered by a doctor at the hospital. About 10 years ago, we switched to pit crew CPR, a more effective version of chest compressions. Basically, it entailed about 45 minutes of uninterrupted CPR with the paramedic pushing the proper drugs. If the patient's heart restarted, then they would be transported. If not, we called it in the field, told the family and helped call the mortuary, etc. It never got any easier. Had to tell my mom my brother had been killed in a one-car automobile accident. Had to talk her gently through it several times over about a week, because she just couldn't process losing her son. I had to tell my mother that her mom had been killed, by my uncle no less. On my 48th birthday, I had to tell my daughters their father had died. The next day I had to tell them he died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. What I didn't tell them was that he had time to put the gun back in the glove box. My family posted the death of my grandpa on Facebook around 3 a.m. and I took off to my mom's house to let her know in person before she saw it online. Hardest thing to do so far. She was so close to him and it really hit her hard. Thank F mine isn't the only one who did this. After my dad died, my mom told my uncle to tell his mom and my cousins, then tell her when he'd done it, so she could tell family friends personally. Under no circumstances was he to start telling everyone he knows. 2 hours later, she saw my cousin had made a big post about how close she was to my dad and how she's crying and shaking and whatever the F, despite the fact she hadn't spoken to him in 5 years. People I knew from school were saying how sorry they were for her loss, and failed to message me or post on my wall even though I was the one who lost their effing dad. Messages were pouring in on my uncle's wall from people we didn't know saying how sorry they were for his loss. They both got hundreds of likes and sympathy messages on their stupid, badly written posts full of lies. And all I got was 10 likes and just one friend telling me he's there if I need anything, and he actually came through on that. My mom had to scramble to tell my dad's friends and other family friends before they logged into effing Facebook. That wasn't even the worst crap they pulled, that came at the funeral. Family's a bunch of effing grief thieves and I hate them for it. Saying I love you for the last time to my grandma nearly killed me. Calling my dad's best friend and telling him that my dad died. They grew up together, they knew each other their entire lives, over 6 decades. Heard him cry over the phone. That hit hard. My son is 4 and I have been trying to talk about his adoption with him. His favorite movie used to be Kung Fu Panda, so I introduced the concept of tummy mummies and daddies, but he just looked at me like I am nuts. He had no concept of how babies were grown, and besides, babies come to the house via a DCF worker dropping them off. Silly mommy. I was a foster parent for many years. I have several kids' books about adoption, but he hates reading. I just keep gently trying to introduce the concept of grown in another belly, but he is not interested at all. My 50th birthday falls on Mother's Day this year, just like when I was born. I make the joke my biomom didn't like her gift, so she retuned me. I think it's funny. I am grateful for her sacrifice. My adoptive parents let my bro and I know we were adopted, special, and loved. I have no memory of when they told me, just that I always knew and it was always okay. They had a kid's book about it too. All that to say, I appreciate the kindness and effort you're putting into making it natural for your son. Being adopted really gave me such a great life despite hardships. Thank you for being such a loving parent. Trying to restore a computer HD for some parents whose toddler drowned in his grandmother's pool. When they had him, they got a digital camera so all photos were on HD. No backups, they had lost all their pictures of their son. After seeing the mother's face, I had to clock out for the day. I worked in a retirement home where they had a locked memory floor. There were far too many family members that would bring their husband or mother or whatever to sit down and discuss then moving in. But made me be the one to tell them. Okay mom, so we're here at so-and-so place. This lady wants to tell you something, and then the whole family would stare at me and expect me to give the news to the person. Oh, by the way, your family is planning on selling your house and things, and now you're going to be living in this room until you die. I was so shocked the first time it happened, but after that I would just demand the family come out of the room with me and tell them I was not going to be the one to tell their family member they are losing everything as the first time they're hearing it. That is some next level crafty. Expecting an absolute stranger to tell a family member or loved one such life-changing news. People suck. Worcestershire sauce. Acting as an election officer. 4 roles to fill and 5 candidates. Most of the candidates didn't even bother turning up for the public count. The one who did turn up was super keen. Once I counted all the votes, I had to tell her that she was the loser. The only loser. I could barely look at her as I announced the result. I left quickly as she was still being consoled by her friends. Telling my brother, who was recovering from a stroke, that our mother passed away. Edit, I failed to mention the worst of it. While my brother was recuperating on one side of the hospital floor, my mother was in a coma not 200 feet away on the opposite side of the same floor, and I couldn't even tell him since his condition was so bad at the time. As a search and rescue coordinator, I've had several conversations where we've told a family that we need to suspend a search and rescue cases based on a shift in search and rescue to body recovery operations. I'm a criminal defense attorney. Hardest thing for me was telling someone they would spend the rest of their life in jail. The time I had to tell our neighbor that I had just witnessed his beautiful collie hit and killed by a vehicle speeding through the neighborhood. We both loved that dog dearly, so it was a real heartbreaking moment to deliver such sad news. Telling the son of a client that his father died 3 minutes before he arrived due to COVID. Or the wife of another client that he had passed. Her scream of denial still haunts me. I told a really small child that chocolate milk doesn't come from brown cows, and he looked really disappointed. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.